We have Yoshay Lama Lindblom with us. She's actually the author of a short story collection, The Way We Are, which is dark tales from Himalayas, as well as Himalayan fantasy duology, which is called Béyul Hidden Lands, and its sequel, Return to Béyul, which has just been released, as well as she has recently translated Chimi Lama's Flight of Monal. And today we are here to hear more about her fantasy duology, which is Béyul Hidden Land. And it is really interesting because this fantasy reimagines Beauty and the Beast and the ancient Yeti myth. So it technically subverts the idea of Tibetan hidden sanctuaries as symbols of inner outer journey which a seeker must undertake towards enlightenment. So obviously, instead of just me describing it, I would really want Yoshi D to come here and let us know a little bit about her story. So, the first thing that I really want to ask Yoshi D is what inspired you to write this Himalayan fantasy, right? And also, what was the journey like creating this world of Biu? Yes.
Thank you so much for your question, Magna. And once again, thank you for giving me this platform to talk about my books. And thank you, everyone who's here. I can see my mother, my husband is here as well. Um, and thank you, everyone, for coming here today. Regarding inspiration for writing Himalayan fantasy, in all of the world's cultures, every mythology, every folklore comes from somebody else's imagination. It comes from a story somebody told in the distant past, and those stories sort of are passed down through generations, through oral traditions. And as hunter-gatherers, we lived in close proximity with nature and animals, and we included them into our storytelling. And as it was told passed down through generations, these stories were shaped and reshaped over time, and it became so deeply ingrained in our imagination that these stories became synonymous with our cultural identity, becoming, of course, the folklore and mythology. So this whole idea that a folklore and mythology could be based of somebody else's fantasy deeply inspired me, and it fascinated me. So I thought that I wanted to give a try to use these old folk tales and mythology and then reimagine it through a fairy tale and write my own book on it.
Yeah.
And about the second half of your question regarding the process, I knew early on what I was going to write with Béyul, but the question was, how was I going to tell a story about this part celestial, part supernatural being? Um, and um, and then this idea of Beauty and the Beast came to me, which as a child, it was my favorite fairy tale. And Belle was one of those characters that sort of deeply inspired me. She was this very strong young woman who didn't need a prince to save her like Snow White and Cinderella. Instead, she became instrumental in saving the beast and transforming him into a prince.
Yeah.
So and then I started loosely fusing these two, like the myth, the Yeti myth and Beauty and the Beast together, and I started to sort of reimagine it through my own in my own narration of the book. And um, and at the same time, while I was weaving this, I created this entirely new mythology as the backbone of my mythical world, which comes as in the first book. It comes it precedes the chapters with a retelling of this very old. In every culture there is the sun goddess and the moon goddess, and you have all the gods and the realms. So I wove that into I reimagined that, and I created the story of the moon goddess Surimi and the sun goddess Kirumi and the all god Heyum. So yeah, so it took me a while. It took quite a long time to sort of get the first draft out, and I did it during this month. November is usually was dedicated to a month of novel writing, and it was called NaNoWriMo. That was National Novel Writing Month. So and it was a challenge that you wrote 50,000 words in 1 month. So that was the time when I wrote the first draft of Béyul back in 2018.
Wow, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So how long did it take you to actually
Um,
write?
for the entire novel to come out, it took me about 3 years. I think 2.5 to 3 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, that's so wonderful because I feel like we don't have a lot of fantasy, particularly focusing on Himalayas and stuff. And the fact that, you got to come up with something very fresh and very innovating, right? Like it's just so interesting. And to hear about, how you came to add in the retelling of Beauty and the Beast, which obviously is a more Western story. So there is an aspect of that fusion as well. So, one thing I really wanted to ask was like, what made you decide that, you're gonna be picking Himalayan like folk tales and perhaps not another, folk tales because we do have a lot of mythologies. And so what made you very much interested in picking Himalayan folk yeah, Himalayan like
Yeah,
folk tales and stuff?
folk tales. Yes, because it is Himalayan folk tales is a part of my heritage,
Mm.
and I come from that part of the world. And
Yeah.
there were stories that my mother told me about my grandmother, who, as a
Mm,
child, back in Lhasa, Tibet, had
mm,
this experience with the Yeti's presence, and
mm,
I really wanted to work with that. And I also felt that much of our folklore and mythologies are kept hidden, and or
yeah,
it is fused into religion, and it is not
yeah,
really creatively explored. So I wanted to really
mm,
work with that. And yeah,
yeah,
it's yeah, part of the reason is of course is
mm.
my the grandmother's stories and my own heritage. Yes.
Mm, right. Yeah, it's really interesting because like, we don't have something like this, like I've just said a while ago as well. And the fact that you decided to pick a very new topic, which again has some correlation with different parts because Himalayas is quite big range, right?
Oh yes, yes,
And yeah, and
yes.
one of the things that we did get to talk was the social and cultural ideas in
Yes.
telling myth and retelling. So, um, I just wanted to kind of like briefly go through that point. So, like, what kind of social or cultural ideas that were you hoping to like kind of explore and like how you kind of created this world? Because last time when we were talking a little bit, like we got to talk about how you actually create, different type of people that represents different culture and we got to see that. So I really wanted to, kind of understand how did you explore different characters or different places that have Himalayan like
Mhm.
influence in that? Yeah.
Yes. Well, it came from the fact that I come from a family line of diverse ethnicities. So Tibetan, Sikkimese, Tamang, Newar. So all of
Mm,
these is embedded in my family line.
mm,
So all of these ethnicities. So I really wanted to use my diverse background and create a world as diverse. So
mm,
and then while writing this fantasy, I didn't really specify or pinpoint on one particular place, because when writing a fantasy, the world building aspect is very broad and is very large.
mm,
So I use the entire range of the Indian Himalayas, so from
mm,
Ladakh in the west to
mm,
Nepal in the east. So they are all very, like, very subtly, like, sort of
mm,
represented in this book.
Mm,
So yes, and as far as creating all these different characters and different types of people, in the sense that fantasy is actually it's mirroring our real world. Like, people are diverse, like how we are. They have real the people in Béyul, characters in Béyul have real life issues with anger and greed and frustrations and the war and strife. So
mm,
so like socially, I feel like, it mirrors our world values, our fears and struggles, and of course, being an imaginary world, yes, but it reflects real life issues like power, inequality, gender identity,
mm,
and at the same time, I think it invites the readers to view their own society through
mm,
the lens of the
yeah.
fantastical. And yeah, that's what I really thought about while, sort of conceptualizing and writing Béyul. And also, as far as the cultural value of this work is concerned, is that I think the very act of reimagining existing mythologies, folklore, and oral traditions is one of the many steps towards preserving one's cultural heritage while reinventing it for the modern audiences. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and like,
Mm.
insight about it. But yeah, like I totally agree with you, right? Like so the fact that when you are making something, you want to make it very authentic, but in the same time, you also need to have a representation. Like for instance, like what you said, like you have created this whole idea around like, from Ladakh all the way to Nepal and
Yes, yes,
how different characters that we see there, different tribe or groups that we see there in the story represents these people and sort of
yes,
like you can kind of see your culture through the lens of others because these are sort of like fantastical creature but again they somehow replicate our culture and our
yes,
yeah and that's really
yes.
interesting. So, could you just tell a little bit about your writing process and like how did you build such a world and especially like developing these characters to be authentic, but in the same time have an aspect of like fantastical elements to it, but in the same time also authentic characters, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
I think much of the characters that I write come from my observing people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Yeah, and when I was writing a Béyul, it took such a long time because it was two books were involved. So what happens is sometimes, like, when you spend a lot of time with your characters, the
Mm-hmm.
characters come alive. They start to narrate the story. So I am the kind of writer who do not plot. Before
Mm-hmm.
writing, I never plot. I cannot plot. So even if I plot, it all goes the other
Mm-hmm.
direction. So
Yeah.
I sit and I write, and as I write, these characters they come to me. Sometimes they come to me when I'm out and walking in the woods or running in the woods. Most of the ideas actually come when I'm outside, and then and I sit down to write them in paper. So that is why my writing takes much longer because I don't plot.
Mm,
So and as far as the characters coming alive is concerned, it's a very beautiful relationship that you begin to share with your characters if you spend a lot of time, with creating these characters.
mm,
So at some point in time, they begin telling their stories, and you become a conduit, like, you become a
yeah.
medium for these characters to speak in. So, for example, I'll tell you about this character in Return to Béyul in my book two.
Mm,
And there is this character called Zavi, and I had no clue about this character, and she suddenly just appeared in my imagination one day,
yes.
and just I felt so compelled to write this particular character. So that way, like, and I just couldn't do without not, like, writing this character. So she's not a main character, she's a by character.
Mm,
She has a very small space in the book, but a very influential one.
mm,
So these kind of things happen, like, so
mm,
when you are so into your world building, when you're so into your characters, and for instance, I spent so much time with these three protagonists, Kaizan, Nilza, and Prince Wangzin, that like for some time I really started living in that world that I had myself created.
Mm,
So in that way, I think writing fantasy creates that, it opens that kind of an imaginary world even for a writer, where you can explore your creative talent to the utmost.
yeah, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
really interesting
Yeah.
outlook of it. Yeah, I definitely agree because I feel like in one hand we do have literary fictions and other
Yes.
genres that do tell a lot about one's culture or social issues. But then again, when you use fantasy to kind of portray, I feel like in one hand it's also accessible, and in another you can also incorporate creativitiness, right? It's
Yeah.
like yeah, you can build up
Absolutely.
your characters, and then just like what you
Yes.
said about going with the flow. Like some character just comes to you and then they just have their own story to tell, and it just goes on from there. Yeah, it's really interesting. So I do
Yeah.
want to talk about some of the characters in particular in your book. And
Hmm.
so right, so we have a couple of characters, like you said, we have in Nilza, as you've mentioned, she's one of the main protagonists in your book. So I kind of wanted to dwell into this chapter 11 in particular when Nilza first meets the queen. And in this particular scene, we're dealing with an information from a position of authority, right? So can you just walk us through how you wrote this scene and like the turning point of it, and what exactly did you want to explore as to the fact between Nilza and the queen, and then how it deals with the position of authority.
So it is one of the pivotal chapters in Béyul Hidden Lands, and where like these two main characters meet for the first time. So the Queen of Béyul is meeting Nilza, and through this chapter, I wanted to explore how information is handled when it comes from a place of position, when it comes from a place of authority. So
Mm,
the information doesn't become a sharing between two
mm,
equals. It becomes it is handed down from somebody who's in a higher position to somebody who's in a lower position. So
mm,
in that way, it reflects the world seen from the top, from the top position.
mm,
And I really wanted to explore this. And in this case, when the queen informs Nilza why she's here in Bayou, and
mm,
she's and of course to marry her son, and this truth has been hidden from Nilza for the longest of time. So, and what can she do with that information when it comes from a place of power? She has no space to either argue about it,
mm,
or place her opinion, express her opinions about it. She is only like compelled to sort of take that information and obey the orders. So, and I really wanted to also talk about how sometimes, women in power, they
mm,
have this tendency to look down upon women without power or agency. And that
mm,
happens quite often in our real world as well. So I wanted to
mm,
talk, and this chapter sort of very subtly, sort of
mm,
explores that idea. And also with the pivotal discovery is that then Nilza is being sort of it was brought to Béyul to sort of marry the prince, and from there how she sort of handles this information, and how she tries to sort of get what she has come she get to get her agenda through this.
mm,
Is sort of it subtly sort of foreshadows in this chapter as
mm.
she moves away from the queen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting, right? But I definitely agree with you, like what you said, right? Like so the power of authority is not really about the gender, but then it's more about the power and how you said like
Absolutely.
sometimes even women themselves tend to
Mhm.
like discriminate, you know? And
Yes.
obviously like living in a patriarchal world, we always face that thing through, I mean, I guess most of the people, but also when it comes to the power itself, like I guess it can affect, different levels of people. And someone like Nilza, right, who came there, kind of got to realize that there's a different agenda for her, which has already been set in stone. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really like subtle way to kind of tackle social issues, right? And I feel
Yes.
like fantasy tends to do that in a very subtle way. It's like these kind of
Yes.
things, it's not just talking about what is happening in BO, but it's actually about the reality as well and how we can explore that side of it. Yeah.
Yes, and I feel that fantasy is so underestimated, especially in our community, because as soon as you say fantasy, people think that it's only for children and it's only.
Yeah.
But what we forget is that we grew up with fantasy, and our whole life is about fantasizing about future, and those
Mm,
that after fantasizing that future, we turn it into reality. So
mm,
the our life itself springs from this very fact that we are able to fantasize, right?
mm,
So and in many ways, like history is closely, a fantasy could be very closely related to history as well, while
mm,
history is like rooted in facts and it's
mm,
very rooted on the ground. Fantasy is like fantasy gives you the wings to fly, while retelling that history that we have had,
mm.
so
Yeah.
I think fantasy is very, very underestimated. But if you really need to sort of know and understand what fantasy does to society and why it's so important,
Mm,
it's not just escapist literature. So I think
mm,
we must really explore this genre
mm.
and encourage more writers to write fantasy.
Mm,
Yeah.
definitely. I feel like I do agree with you. And what you said was like very beautifully said about how, we need to kind of like, in order for humans to move forward, we need to fantasize. We need to kind of
Yes.
create something new. We need to brainstorm that to think about
Yes.
what's your next goal, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's just like that. And how you said fantasy itself is a underrated genre. I definitely do agree with that. I feel like oftentimes we tend to put like if you want to write a serious fiction, it has to be literary fic or it has to
Mm,
have some kind of, like experimental avant-garde kind of fiction out there. But that's not actually true because um we have a lot of fantasy, even in the Western part of the world, that has pivotally changed people's life. Like if we're talking about Lords of the Ring, or we have like Game of Thrones, we have even for middle grade to adults like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, all of these books that have somewhat changed people's life in understanding different issues and understanding mythology. Again, I feel like mythology plays a huge role in that because a lot of these, books have started off from an
mm,
inspiration from mythologies, again, folk tales, a lot of these things. So that's really interesting, like, how oftentimes something that we do consider that as like, oh, children's genre is actually people's like foundational level of entering, and it's just,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, I just wanted to.
It is, yeah, it's absolutely necessary to dream and to be able to fly on the wings of imagination and create something uh, like divorced from reality, but at the same time reflecting the very reality we live in. So I feel
Mm,
like fantasy is a very much needed genre,
yeah,
especially in today's world.
yes, yes, definitely, right. Yeah, I do agree with you. Especially for us, I feel like marginalized literature as well. I feel
Yes,
like
yes,
it's the most accessible and approachable way to move
yes,
forward is to introduce them through fantasy. I feel like it's
yes,
always easy because you have characters, you have lands, and you're like, you feel like you are in
yes,
a adventure, but then actually you're learning quite a lot from there.
yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah, so I just wanted to touch upon other two characters. So we have Kaizan, as you've mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Nilza. So, um, there's a particular emotional moment in chapter 26, and which kind of like talks about this conflict between duty and the feeling, the emotion that one feels. And I just wanted to talk about like could you talk a little bit about how was the challenge in writing what is felt versus what is said, in this particular moment? Like, what was the challenge like writing these kind of scenes?
Right. Yes, like you said, I really wanted to, through this chapter, I wanted to explore the difference between sometimes what is felt and what
Mm,
is said. So
mhm,
these two being the two opposites, like, and so in this chapter, Kaizan rescues Nilza and her mother from the enemy, and he is
mm,
supposed to take them to the capital to present them to the queen. Um, but he takes them to this abandoned cottage for rest and recuperation before he takes them down. And it's a very emotional chapter in the sense that here we have Kaizan who's trying to suppress his feelings for Nilza. And because he is not in a position to harbor any kind of feelings for the princess consort. And on the other hand, we have Nilza, who expects a great deal of warmth and affection from Kaizan, having spent a lot of time with Kaizan in the initial chapters of the book. So, but she is met with this very cold and distant individual.
mm,
So, which clearly she's clearly incensed by his insensitivity. So the dialogue between these two come from a place of suppression and holding back emotions, and there's a lot of bitterness that spills out. And also this chapter, through this chapter, I wanted to highlight Kaizan's character in the sense that he knows that he is taking Nilza and her mother to the queen, and it is nothing good is going to come out of it. So he knows that, but yet he is bent on taking them, and it shows that when it comes to duty, he's very duty bound, and when it comes to
mm,
duty, he doesn't think twice about sacrificing either his feelings or
mm,
somebody else's. So this is one of the
mm,
character arcs of Kaizan that is
yeah,
reflected through this chapter. Yeah,
right.
and so it's a very nice, beautiful scene where there is a lot of these. Although there is bitterness between them, but at the same time there is this undercurrent of this very,
Mm,
like very painful feelings that you feel
yeah.
as a reader. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's so interesting. And I always wondered, like, when writers do tend to write these kind of emotional scene, right? Like
Hmm.
what kind of element does it play into? Like, do you guys just yeah, this is just my question out of the blue, by the way, because I'm really interested and I wanted to
Go
connect.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know, like, does is it also do you also write it with go with the flow? Like you took it to that moment and you're like, okay, this is how I want it to turn out, or is it something that you have kind of plotted?
No, like I said, I did not plot any of the chapters, but when I'm out, and I'm usually it's when I'm out, when I'm running or when I'm walking out in the woods, I get this, like flashes of
Mm,
these visions or these ideas that just come, and then I know exactly what I'm going to do with the chapter
mm,
and what I'm going to do with the next scene. So I come
mm,
back immediately and I quickly, like write it in a piece of paper, because otherwise there's a risk of forgetting. So
mm,
I do that, and then when I sit down to write, and usually when I write the first draft, I get up really really early in the morning, at about 3 o'clock in the morning. That's
mm,
when I feel like very inspired. I feel ideas come to me, words and sentences come to me in a much more easily. So and so there. So when I write emotions, it usually comes to me first. Emotions come to
mm,
me first, and then I like sort of translate it into paper. So it is that is why I feel like writers are very, very sensitive people, because a lot of the writing they do come from emotions and
yeah,
feelings, and yeah,
yeah,
and whether it
right.
is any kind of emotion, whether it's anger or whether it's bitterness or
Mm,
whether it's your heartbreak. And many times you sort of also try to weave in your own experiences into writing, and I think that
mm.
that becomes even better.
Right. I
Did
do
you?
agree,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to have that intuition, like like that
Yes.
feeling inside, like the emotional connection that you feel
Yes.
with these characters and that you
Yes.
think that this character would have done and how this character would have acted in these situation. And right, like it's so
Yes.
interesting. So in one hand, we're exploring the world, right, in fantasy, like we're exploring like where we are, the different places, the different characters, and then inside that we have sort of other issues that we're tackling into, whether it's power of authority, whether it's duty, something that an that a character has to do,
Mm.
and then like what you've talked about, suppressing emotion. So we're learning all these things through while walking into this world. So that's absolutely amazing. And I wanted to move on to the second sequel, right? So we have a new
Mm.
sequel called Return to Béyul, right? So
Yes.
what exactly would you say that is new without spoiling the details? But like, what
Uh,
exactly would you say is like something new about the second part to Béyul, and how does it explore again the emotional and the cultural landscape than it did in the first part?
well, because it is the same world we are going
Mm,
back to, so there's not much change in the cultural and the social
mm,
values that the book reflects. But at the same time, as the title suggests, return to Bayul. That is, Nilza is being returned to. She is returning to
mm,
Bayul. But unlike in the first book, where she entered Bayul as the potential consort of the prince, here she is returning to Bayul as an outcast. So she's like an so as she returns to Bayul, she only returns to Bayul with the hope of reuniting with her mother and a secret wish she cherishes of meeting Kaizan again. Those are the two things that like compel her to return, despite the
mm,
circumstances that
mm,
she experienced in book one.
mm,
So, but as she returns, of course, things have changed in Bayul. Bayul is at the cusp of a war, and also she realizes that she will not be able to return to Caruso, uh, where she was raised. So, and she really struggles with the idea of accepting Bayul as her new home,
mm,
constantly feeling displaced and disconnected. Um,
mm,
so, and at the same time, she struggles with the idea of this past emotions and hurtful feelings from the past, together with the new feelings developing in the course of the
mm,
book, through the course of the book. So yes, without spoiling, I can say that it is a much more dramatic book, and there are many things happening in this book,
mm.
and also it is much more thicker than the first book,
Oh.
and because there are new worlds have been introduced, new characters are introduced,
Mm,
new relationships are explored. So, and then we have this whole LGBTQ inclusion as well, with this particular character, with a particular type of clan. It's called Gatsu. They are
mm,
actually a product of illegitimate union between the Zongshan of Beiyul and the Hiburin of Chizang, and they are like almost like the Salid people, like and they are not
mm,
allowed to work for the administration, so they live in the shadows, and but they are magical beings, like they are
mm,
not like this regular human beings. They are born with supernatural abilities, and so
mm.
in book two you see much more of the Gatsu and how they rise in prominence.
Oh, that's really
So
interesting. Yeah.
yes, yes, and then there are a lot of like
Mm,
like relationships like blooming, and it's not just
mm,
centered on the
mm,
main three characters, which was in book one. So this book is a much more broader in spectrum that
mm.
way. Yeah.
Right, right. So just like what you've mentioned. So, like we have in one hand we're being introduced to clans
Yeah.
and different like new culture, but then also we have this whole political building. And I feel like that's really interesting about fantasy is that, in one hand, we have writers doing the world building, obviously, because they have to construct this world. And then we
Yes.
have characters, obviously, character development. And then, like you said, some of these characters might have superpowers or, the supernatural beings. And then we
Yeah.
also have the other emotional part that they're also constructing with like relationship building and
Yes.
like
Yeah.
those conflicts that come into play. So, like
Yes.
because you have written both literary fiction, right? Like your first book was a short story collection, but I would say like
Yes.
would you say it's more literary fiction?
Yes. It is. It
Yeah.
is. Yes.
So what do you think was the difference? And do you think it was more challenging to write a literary fiction or fantasy, or was it like similar range? Like what was the experience like?
I think, well, after writing The Way We Are, I felt
Mm,
like I had written quite enough of, like, of our issues and
mm,
real life people. And
mm,
although I used a lot of composite characters in The Way We Are, which was like a several characters tumbling into one particular character. So and then I really wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something grand, and I wanted to create this sweeping a world. So and but at the same time, fantasy is not my genre. I don't usually write fantasy. I don't read fantasy, so to speak. But I did read quite a lot of fantasy when I was writing these books, and mostly Asian fantasy. There was one book in particular called The Goddess Chronicle, and written by a Japanese novel, a fantastical novel, written by Natsuo Kirino. And that book really inspired me in the sense that the whole my background mythical land
mm,
behind the historical and the mythical background of Béyul
mm,
was inspired from that book. I really liked how the author had portrayed the goddess stories of the goddess, weaving ancient Japanese folklore into it. So,
mm,
and that was one of the major inspirations. So, but at the same time, you've asked whether it was easier to
mm,
write literary fiction. I think neither is easy to write. I literary fiction, you literally have to sit with your dark side. You really have to work with your dark emotions and a lot of emotions, and then a lot of character, and then you have to make it as real as you
mm,
can. Even though when you're basing off on real life characters, it's sometimes it's like that, like, you have one story coming in your head, but when you write it on paper it comes completely different. So that challenge is something to sort of navigate through writing a literary fiction.
mm,
And while writing Bayul is that, of course, to write fantasy you have to be passionate about that
mm,
world, like, because how else would you create a world that is credible, like,
mm,
that it sort of touches the reader and speaks to the reader. So you have to come
mm,
from a place of passion. So neither is easy. So in both, in literary fiction you have to just get down to the nitty gritties of,
mm,
and very detailed sort of thinking and creating. And at the same time also you read a lot. Like, I think all writers must read a copious amount when you are going to find a voice of your own, like, when so yeah, so that's how I feel, like, neither are easy. It's both are very challenging,
mm,
and short stories are um, even more challenging in one particular way, in the sense that you have to condense it all the time. Like,
mm,
the desire is to spill all over. You want to keep writing about, because we are so passionate about that story, and then you want to keep building on it. But then
yeah.
you have to you write it, and then you revise it, and you revise it, and you revise it until
Mm,
you condense it into a short
mm,
story. And it that way I feel short stories are very challenging to write.
mm,
And with the Bayul I had this feeling that novels are much more easier that way, because you can really write in a broad way. Like, you don't have to restrict yourself within
yeah.
the frame of a short story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do understand what you're trying to say, and I do agree with that, especially the short story part, because I mean, I teach short stories as well, and I feel like one of the things that is quite challenging is that, for them to kind of understand the themes and everything that's going on, and then I expect, like, for me as a lecturer, like it's even harder to explain it to my students. That I wonder how
Yeah.
writers themselves have to go through to condense
Yes.
everything that they're trying to talk about in
Yes. Yes.
like
Yes,
few
indeed.
hundred
And
words.
also, yeah, and get the idea across as well. Like, yeah, we have to get the main story across as
Yeah.
well. So how do you start at the pivotal point, or do you start, sometimes you start in the
Mm.
end and you go towards the beginning as
Yeah.
well, like, so
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, it's quite challenging. Short stories, I feel, is quite challenging to write.
Right, right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I really am like, super excited to read both of the books, and I have kind of like started reading your other like the short story fiction, but I really want to read this one because I feel like there are very, very few. I mean, as much as I know, know that there are only very few numbers of fantasy, especially focusing
Yes.
on Himalayas or even like
Mm,
Nepali kind of mythology. And so I'm very much excited to see this. And I think this is a new take towards our literature. And yeah, and so yeah, I just realized that we're getting closer to the end. So I want to take this time to take the floor to the audience and then let them ask us some questions. So if there is any question that you guys have, you guys can raise your hand if you want to like speak, or you can just throw in the question in the chat box and then we can read it out.
yes. Gotta get the chat box out, I guess.
Yeah. And also, if you guys are interested in reading Béyul, and we have both of them available for online purchases via Amazon, so you can just scan the QR code right now and then get your book, and you'll be ready to read. Another thing is also if you guys are interested in reading together, we will be reading all of the books that are in our event after, yeah, once we start our book club again. Because as for now, our book club has kind of been paused. So once we start reading,
Mhm.
yeah, once we start using it, oh yes, yes, okay, you can be, um,
Unmuted.
yeah,
Oh, there is Pankaj.
yes.
Should I wait for Dr. Satyadeep to talk first, or should I answer
I think
Pankaj's?
I'm unmuting Dr. Satadip. Oh yes, yes. I think he's about to speak
Hello.
because yes.
Hi, hi.
Hi.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm still driving. I'm on my way to Gangtok. So
Oh,
yes,
thank you so
I mean,
much.
I was in and out of the network zone. So yeah, uh, and I've been always asking this to Yoshay. Uh, when do we see a political fiction from you?
Political fiction. Oh my God.
with
I.
with all the fantastic characters that you've created, in fantasy. Uh,
Mhm.
I think you can give all of them a character which showcases some of our dumb leaders in the hills.
uh, eh, I have not really thought about it, but although I do, there was a time that I used to think about writing a political, like not fully political, but a novel leaning slightly towards our political issues, and I've just tried a little bit in one of my stories in Way We Are, titled "Monsters of Men." Try to highlight a little bit of the violence of these political movements, and but I can consider writing a political novel in the future. There's nothing that I would say no to as far as writing is concerned. So I would like to explore uh, that using different characters, and thank you
Yeah,
so much
something
for
like an animal,
tipping.
something like an animal farm, something like an animal farm.
Yes, yes, very
You've
subtly,
got all
yes.
these animals. Yeah, you've got all these animals, depicting
Yes,
certain characters.
absolutely.
You could do with
Yes,
your all your fantasy characters.
yes, yes. Now, when I think of it, yes, something might just turn up. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
encouraging me in that direction as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Thank you.
I do think
Yeah.
that's a
Thank you.
great idea actually. Right? Like
And
using
then,
some political
yeah,
message. Oh yes,
we
we
have a
have another
question
one. Yes.
by from Pankaj. He says, have you considered writing a literary novel? If yes, theme, genre, what theme or genre would you want to explore? Will it be based on Gorkhaland or another story with a subtle background of Gorkhaland or something completely different, a normal social novel? Yes, I mean, literary fiction is my go-to genre from the beginning. And I will be going back to writing a literary novel. And there is one particular project that I'm working on right now, and it's a historical novel. It's going to be a historical novel, loosely based in my grandmother's life, my great grandmother's life. So right now I'm doing some kind of research around it. Yeah. So, but it won't be Gorkhaland, unfortunately. I think Gorkhaland issue is being explored quite widely in our community, and now we have this wonderful novel by Sharda, which is soon to arrive, soon to be published. So I will not be writing on Gorkhaland. Yeah. So yeah, if that answers your question, Pankaj. And then we have another question from Ranu. Not directly related to the book of yours, but I was wondering, how does your position as a woman influence the genre of writing you practice, or does it have any? I ask this as I read political dialogues and fiction, being highly conversed about writings of men. I hope the question makes sense. Well, as a position, as a woman writing, I think we are in, as far as women writing is concerned, we are in a very fortunate time where women's fiction are being written to a very, very great degree. Here in the West, there is a huge upsurge of women writing both fiction and nonfiction, and things like with the Women's Prize that happen every year in UK for both fiction and nonfiction has suddenly brought this deluge of women writers. And if so, yeah. So my position of as a woman when I write, I would say that well, I don't really think of I do write my characters mostly based off on women, but when I write from a position of almost a very genderless position, where I don't think like a woman, because as a writer you need to be very fluid. You can't just think of write like thinking as one particular gender, because you have to enter into the consciousness of many other characters of men and women. So I'd never really thought of sort of writing from and thought of my genre while writing a fiction, although most of my fiction are based on women's stories and women's condition, and also there is the whole idea with women's empowerment, women empowerment from within our community. So I tend to continue to write around themes like this, and especially give voice to the voiceless, that is our great grandmothers and great grandmothers, these very strong women upon whom our lineage is built. Yeah. And I don't know if I've answered that correctly, Ranu. If there's anything else that I have not answered, please specify it. I see it would be a repetitive question as okay, no, not at all. And sounds interesting. Okay, sure. Thank you, Pankaj, for your question. And Jonas, my husband, is asking a question today. I believe you can read Béyul through political glasses, addressing both caste, political oppression, etc. Absolutely, because you can have that kind of lenses into Béyul, because you have Zongshan, this very superior people and superior beings who have have a lot of supernatural and celestial intervention. So they are one of the most powerful clans in the Himalayas. And then we have again the formidable enemies who are not as strong, but who are always posing a constant threat to Béyul. So and then you can these Gatsus who are the fallen lot. So in that way, I have explored how the nature of caste in Béyul, and the oppression again because the queen is a kind of a dictator in Béyul, and she makes decisions without really consulting anyone and her ministers and stuff like that. So you have this a whole idea of like this political nature of that you can study or you can read into Béyul. Thank you so much, Ranu.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the interesting thing that I kind of like thought about just now when you were talking is like how in Béyul, you know, there's queen. So like that's really interesting. So she's the most
Yes,
powerful person. So
yes.
like is there an intention behind you chose to be queen rather than a king?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Because in all of these fantasies that you usually read, it's a very patriarchal world. You have the
Mm-hmm.
king, like, and you have the ministers, and it's very patriarchal. And I wanted to create a world that could only be ruled through, again, the prophecies and, yeah, and to tradition that only queens can sit on the throne. There will not be a male ruler of that land. And yeah, and in Béyul, it is that from the beginning, only queens can sit on the throne. So that is why she has two sons, and so when that happens, when she doesn't have a daughter, so like a candidate from another royal family is chosen. So there is in book 2, you will see that her niece, Princess Revasu, will be the future queen of Béyul. So it's always handed down to women, and I really wanted to create that world for women and especially our community, because so many times I have wondered about the lack of representation in literature uh, for our people, especially our youth. So, and then I really wanted to create something so that the future generation have something to fall back on as far as like fantasy is concerned and stories are concerned. So yes, I sort of empowering our community that way. And then there's a question or a comment from somebody writes here, Jonas again. Can you talk about how these characters can work as role models and empowering young people in the hills and Himalayas, giving them identity? Of course, like when you can see, like we always grew up looking at people in media who have nothing to do with us, ethnically concerned. Like we grew up with Bollywood films, and we read Cinderella and Snow White as children, so we never had a representation, so to speak. So I think Béyul stands as that representation for the coming generation. And in that way, it becomes a role model for the young generation, and it stands as it empowers the young people, because suddenly you have these people who are quite like you, like they have the same sensibilities like you. So yeah, that way, like you sort of empower. I mean, through Bay, I'm trying to empower the younger generation from the Himalayas, and sort of giving them identity, because you never know where the books go, and and in a world where somebody reads a Himalayan fantasy, then obviously they will be thinking about people like us, and in that way we are suddenly we are brought into visibility. Visibility is given to us, and of course, and through visibility comes empowerment. And my mom writes, it is very interesting to talk about the fantasy book. I finished reading the book, and you can find political issues in the book, romance, heartbreaking, and supernatural issues as well, and social issues as well. So yes, it's fantastic that you finished reading it. I want to ask Yoshi about writing short stories and fantasy, which is hard. I think I've answered that some time ago. I think neither is easy. It's both are very difficult, and short stories again, you have to sort of confine yourself within the frame of a short story, so it becomes very difficult to sort of shorten it as you write it. And fantasy again, because the world building aspect of a fantasy is very difficult, I would say, because it has to capture the imagination of the readers. It has to speak to them. It has to it has to be credible enough for them to believe in it as well. So yes, neither is easy.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, I think that was a really interesting session. If we do have
Yes.
any more questions, do keep them going and then we can come up. But
Yeah.
like I kind of wanted to add something when we were talking
Mhm.
about the young people, like the
Yeah.
identity whole aspect, because I think that's really interesting that I mean, I'm not sure like what books you read in your childhood, but then when I grew up, like there was fairy tales and there was folk tales, but also we
Yes.
had books like Percy Jackson. So I remember when I was in
Mm.
like high school, I read like Percy Jackson and Harry Potter and all these stuff. And I feel like it's really interesting to see Himalayan literature kind of making a like a start to that, right? So that
Yes.
we people can also have something relatable and we have something very approachable and accessible to start reading since childhood, as well as it's accessible to people who are adults as well, right? Because I feel like in one hand, I feel like adults will see some social issues like what we talked about, like the power issue, the caste, the politics issue. We are going to see that. But then with younger children, right, they're going to understand the very basic, the foundational of like, different cultures and also adventure in inside that. And I feel like that's really interesting that we're now having this kind of things
Yes.
within our own culture that we can also start
Yes.
reading.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
and also
So,
yeah, and also like sort of young writers who are probably like wanting to write fantasy, but they are being
mm,
discouraged because fantasy is not the mainstream literature
yeah.
that we read. And I think if you are the kind of writer who wants to explore this genre, you must go ahead and write it because fantasy is not just an escapist literature.
Yes.
That much we must understand.
Yes, I definitely do agree. I think like we had quite a long talk about that. And
Yes.
yeah, and I'm so glad that actually we get to finish our whole literary festival with you
Oh
as well.
yes,
Yes, and I'm
yes,
so excited
yes,
because we do have something new coming up and then obviously we're also going to resume our book club and we're going to be reading all of the books that we have talked about in our book talk
yes.
events, and we'll also be doing something new. So hopefully with that in hand and everything that the authors have talked about, we'll have more and more people who will be interested in projecting out their works, their commentaries, their creative writing
Oh,
stories.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it,
yeah,
being a part of it as well.
yes.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's any more questions, but if there's not, so I think we can end our session here.
Yeah.
And before we end the session, I really want to say a big thank you to Yoshay D for joining us and also for helping with
So much.
everything. I feel like since the beginning of Nepali Narratives, you have been a very pivotal person to guide us through and joining us in every event, and obviously to all the other speakers as well. So obviously we also have Pankaj Giridai here. We have
Yes.
Satyadeep Dai as well. I'm not sure if he's still here or not, but he was in the session as well as Ranu as well. So thank you all of you for making, Nepali Narrative's first digital literary festival happening. And
Yes.
I think without you guys and your contribution to it, it wouldn't have been possible. And I also want to give a special thanks to all of the people that have worked for this festival. So Nisham
Thank you very
for
much.
all. I mean, they're not here today because they're quite busy on Sunday,
Hmm.
but yeah, I just wanted to give a big thanks to Nisham as well for designing all of the posters and the events and everything. And then I also have Mickey D, who also helped me with all of the marketing or whatever, like, making all the posts and stuff when I was not available. And then a big thanks to the moderator, Pranish. So he's there. He doesn't want to show his face, but thank you very much because
Thank you very much,
yeah,
Pranesh.
without him, we wouldn't have a moderator. So thank you so much for doing all the stuff. Yeah. So yeah,
Mm,
I guess this is the end, and hopefully we will be back next year much stronger with more speakers, and I can't wait to do
mm,
more events, and hopefully you guys will
yes,
be there as well.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so
Okay.
much once
Thank
again,
you.
Magna, and the entire team of Nepali Narrative,
Yes. Thank you so
to all the
much.
speakers and to all the ones who came here today to listen
Yes.
to me. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.